this video, I'm going to show you guys how to build the best $1,600 gaming PC build that is awesome not only for 1440p gaming, but 4K gaming too. Utilizing AMD's newly price dropped RX 7900 XT, one of the best price to performance cards for 4K gaming, and a brand new mid-range case from Cooler Master that I'm yet to build in, I'm quite intrigued about this one. So let's dive into it after a quick word from today's video sponsor. Take your build to the next level with Apacer's sleek RGB DDR5 memory. Available with a wide range of speeds and capacities, the Apacer Panther lineup has a kit for everyone. A great looking aluminium alloy heatsink offers excellent heat dissipation, while Intel XMP 3.0 and AMD Expo certification means this RAM is a great fit for Team Red and Team Blue systems. Plus, RGB support in Asus, GeekaWhat, MSI and ASRock software suites makes this an easy addition to any build. Learn more at the first link in the description below. I think it makes sense to go through the CPU and GPU combo I picked for this build before any of the other parts, as I worked really hard to fit these in the $1,600 budget. The graphics card is the 7900 XT, as I mentioned in the intro. And when this card came out, it wasn't fantastic value for money. We're talking $899 US. That was more than the 70 Ti and the new 70 Ti Super. And for the extra $100, you might as well have bought the XTX. Now, this has come down in price dramatically in recent weeks, to the point now where there's multiple on Newegg for under that $700 price point. That's a whole $100 cheaper than the 4070 Ti Super. And if you look at the performance graphs, this card really is quite impressive. 1440p, you can smash through anything, and 4K is not a bad story for the 7900 XT either. Now, the 4070 Ti Super is the better card when it comes to things like ray tracing and DLSS 3.5, and as AMD's recent financial results showed, a lot of people care about those kind of features. What do you guys think? Is this the better bet? I think for a system like this today, it makes the most sense. And of course, the 70 Ti Super would push us up to over $1,700 for the total build cost. I've paired this up with a Ryzen 7 CPU. Not very often you see me use this chip on the channel. This particular model is the 7700 Non-X. Now, with a bit of an overclock on our B series motherboard, we can get close to the performance of the X chip. And to be honest with you, at the higher resolutions, the CPU is less of a bottleneck anyway. This does give 2 extra cores over the Ryzen 5 7600 and 7600X though, and I felt that made sense. 2 more cores, 4 more threads, and performance that rivals more a 14600K from Intel than say a 14400F. I just feel like spending that extra cash is going to be beneficial at 1440p, and especially if you're playing these sort of competitive esports titles on this build at 1080p too. I'm going to be installing this CPU into what might be one of my favorite motherboards ever. Now, this is GeekaWhat's B650 Gaming X AX, and in many ways, this board gives you basically all the features you're going to need and more, at least for a gaming build. Opening this up shows you exactly why, other than the fact the socket cover just doesn't seem to want to stay on, so just be careful about that. You can see from the design it's pretty colour neutral, there's plenty of heatsink coverage on the board, and while the PCB is sort of a kind of shade of brown, I think the heatsinks help to mask this, and aesthetically looks pretty nice. Obviously, it's not just the visuals though that made me buy the board. AM5 socket, of course, for all those Ryzen chips, 4 DDR5 RAM DIMM slots, loads of fan and RGB headers. They matter way more than you think when it comes to connecting up builds with a semi-reasonable number of fans. The rear panel has Wi-Fi 6E and 2.5 gig Ethernet, again both very important, with a high-speed 10 gigabit USB Type-C port on the rear and the all-important USB Type-C header on the front as well. Really, as far as boards go, for under $200, it does not get much better. If you want more high-speed USBs and you're doing video editing, you need the bandwidth, go for a slightly higher-end board. But this is genuinely, I think, all you need. I'm going to install the CPU into the board now, we might as well. And on a Ryzen board, this is nice and easy. In fact, it's the same as Intel nowadays. Pins on the socket rather than pins on the CPU. This cover's really not doing anything for me. Lift up the socket and lift up the arm. Drop the CPU into place with the golden triangle on the processor in the top left. That's just this corner right here. Secure the cover and push the arm down. No problem. I might as well, I suppose, touch on the RAM and the SSD while we're here. This is Corsair's Vengeance RGB DDR5. To be honest, a little bit torn about what RAM to use. I've really been liking Team Group's T-Force Delta recently. The 32 gig kits of those are really affordable, pretty much on par, if not slightly cheaper than this Corsair kit. However, I find that the Corsair kit does give me less problems at boot, and in many respects, that extra sort of reliability or ease of use is worth it. Here on the channel, when we have issues with memory and builds, it never really seems to be Corsair, at least touch wood. So I have no problems at all recommending a kit like this. 32 gigs, absolutely fine. 16 is not enough. 4864 is a bit too much. Talking to Team Group though, I have gone for one of their SSDs, and this is a fairly recent addition, I suppose, to our SSD selection, shall we say. This is the MP44L, and I've heard some really good things about it. Now, you can find a full review of this drive up in the card section now on GeekaWhat.com, and I'll link this and everything else today down below for UK, US, and loads of other regions. The main reason though, as you'll see from those links below, is the price. Now, this is really price competitive for a Gen 4 NVMe drive, and delivers generally really strong speeds. There are, of course, other options you could consider. The P3 Plus from Crucial is slightly slower, but may cost you a bit less money. WD's SN770 is another solid choice. As soon as you go any higher end than that, like 980, 990 Pro from Samsung, you're just spending more money. And I don't believe you need to in a system like this, at least not for gaming as your primary application. SSD is one of those things that just got so fast. I remember like building with a SATA drive that had a 500 meg read and write, and that was impressive. This is like 4 or 5 gigabytes. So lots and lots of progress on that front, which is nice to see. I think that's nearly everything for the motherboard assembly. I always like to do as much as possible. However, I may look at the CPU cooler, and I suppose now's a good chance to talk about this, as it's another unusual choice for me. Now, typically in these builds, I'll go air cooler to maximize value, or a large 360 or 420mm AIO if I have to. But we've recently tested this, the Atmos 240 and Cooler Master's Atmos 360, and been really impressed with both. In terms of why I picked the Atmos 240, it gives the Ryzen 7 a little bit more cooling headroom than an air cooler, but is going to be cheaper than some of the 360mm options out there. You only have to look as far as the unboxing experience to see that Cooler Master have really stepped things up a notch with this. And just one example of that is these like 3D printable things that you can make for them, so you can actually change the top plate with a design you've 3D printed yourself, which I suppose is quite cool. Now, all labeled, so accessories, that's going to be all the cables and stuff, and then the AMD socket, that's going to be the bag I'll be needing for this system. You can see in here, we've got the AMD screws, always a good start, alongside 2 AMD brackets as well, so we're going to need those for sure. And then the radiator comes with the fans pre-mounted, which saves a step, and with a little cardboard sleeve to protect the actual fins of the rad. Really nice attention to detail. The main reason I've opened it up though is so that I can add these AMD brackets on. Doing this now is just so much easier than when the actual radiator's in the case. It's a really small step, but will save time. You'll also see on the motherboard, there is obviously, of course, our AMD pre-installed backplate. There are some AMD male-to-male screws that need to go onto this backplate area, so I'm going to screw those in as well before moving on to the case. Talking of which, here it is. Now, I realized earlier I said this is Cooler Master's new case. It's their Masterbox 600 bigger is better, which is a bit worrying. I didn't realize this was a huge case. And now I'm slightly concerned it might just be a little bit too big, but let's see what the outcome is by, of course, unboxing this thing and checking it out for ourselves. Ugh. I feel like I'm gonna get a static electricity shock, and I really don't want to. Oh, not too bad. Oh, I knew that was coming. You know when you know something's about to happen and it's unavoidable, so you just kind of have to embrace it. Let's see what we're working with. Now, at the front, oh, that's white. I thought that was like a piece of tape or something, but I like it. Then the side panel, I don't know whether it's toolless or whether it's just screwed in for shipping. I really don't quite know. So let me unscrew that. Yeah, see, I think that that's a toolless design with just basically a screw that stops the panel coming off in transit. Yes, it is. Nice. The inside looks okay. It's got BTF support as well, which is better seen, again, if I take another side panel off. So let me remove the rear, and then you'll be able to see just how many cutouts there are. But regardless of this, the motherboard tray still feels pretty strong. Around the rear of the case, there is the integrated RGB and fan hub. Again, nice. 3 140s at the front, a 120 at the back, and they are, I think, all RGB as well. Maybe the back one is, yes, RGB too. Cooler Master. I was going to say amazing, but what in the world is this? It's got the crappy I/O covers that you can't screw back in. Oh! What the f? No. Really? What, Cooler Master, what are you doing? Like, there are cases a third or half the price of this that do not have those really, really annoying snappable I/O. What? I do not get that. But I'm going to just try and mentally block it from my brain, build the system anyway. The only thing you really need to do is make sure that you don't accidentally remove the wrong PCI lane cover. That's the only thing. So it's not actually that big of a problem. I just think it looks and I think it shows a lack of attention to detail that I find highly disappointing. I'm not happy about that. Anyway, moving swiftly on, motherboard-wise, going to install this. Now, this is a BTF-compatible case or a back-to-front zero cables, whatever you want to call it. This isn't a BTF motherboard, but it's nice to have that support so that if GeekaWhat do a cheaper BTF board, we can, of course, put it in this build. I think theirs is called Project Stuff. I can't really keep up. Now, all the standoffs look to be in the right locations. And what that means is the motherboard will very easily slide into place. Make sure that I/O pokes through the rear, again, nice and simple, and just get all those standoffs lined up. The center one is raised, so that will hold the motherboard in place and allow, of course, me or you to screw this in without too many problems. 3 screws at the top, 3 along the middle, and 3 down the bottom. Nice and simple. All the screws are included at the rear of the chassis for this step. Once the motherboard's in, I'm going to do the radiator next. Now, this is only a 240mm rad, so we're not going to have any problems squeezing it in. The reason I didn't go for a front-mounted installation is because they're 140s, and this just wouldn't be compatible. Dust filter we don't need, because this is an exhaust, so we don't want the extra resistance. The rad is going to go in at the top. I'm going to install the rad first, took all the cables through the cutouts, not the BTF cutouts, the actual cable management cutouts, then finish things off by adding the water block onto the CPU. The 4 thumb screws you need come included, as does the thermal paste for this stage. That's going to keep the CPU cool and actually be quite an easy all-in-one installation process. So kudos to Cooler Master. What you got wrong with the PCI lanes, you got right with the cooler. So that's, well, something, I suppose. The graphics card is next up, and this is where I've now got to be really careful because obviously got to make sure I take out the right lanes. Now, I'm pretty confident it's the second and the third one. Basically, you kind of peel the side of it back a bit like that. Then you have to just kind of give it a wiggle like that. Kind of just, these are really stiff as well. They're not very easy. Oh, what? This is so crazy. There's 1. And 2, and you can see by the time they come out, they're just totally ruined. They're like no good for anything or anybody. So yeah, Cooler Master, that's a shame. Anyway, push the clip back on the PCI slot. That's going to help us. And then slide the graphics card into place. Now, there we are. This particular model, I should probably discuss it. 7900 XT, this is the more like AMD Founders Edition. Obviously, that's not what it's called. That's an NVIDIA term, but it's the AMD in-house design. Any 7900 XT you can find that's good value is what I would pick. With the GPU in, it is just the PSU that remains. Now, I was originally going to go for a Cooler Master unit in this build to tie in with, well, the Cooler Master theme, really. However, the pricing just wasn't competitive enough for the budget. So I instead went for this Thermaltake Smart BM3750. I'm not going to walk you guys through all the detailed cable and wiring steps. You can find a video, though, and a full written guide in the cards now, which covers that in a bit more detail. Instead, I'm going to get the whole system wired up, get the RGB working, and then turn this thing on, because I'm really intrigued to see the kind of performance on offer. After, of course, a nice GeekaWhat montage. Moving through into those all-important gaming benchmarks, and it's no surprise to see this 7900 XT powered build perform really well. Call of Duty's Warzone is first up, and at 4K high, the build achieved a really solid 150 FPS on average. The gameplay looked great, 4K is obviously super high fidelity, and if you tune down to 1440p, you're going to see those numbers push even further. Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 3 was rather unsurprisingly a very similar story, with a very small difference in frame rate bumping up to 152 with identical settings. Starfield at 4K is perhaps a more meaningful test, one that pushes the 7900 XT to its limits. Here the build achieves 72 FPS, and while this was lower than I would have liked, it's not exactly out the question for a game that is just so difficult to run and arguably quite poorly optimized. This is still a very playable frame rate at 4K, but may give many of you cause for notching those settings down to 1440p instead. Moving through into a low resolution title, Fortnite at 1080p competitive, just to see how far we can push that frame rate, and this build achieved over 300 FPS, 311 to be precise, while Apex Legends performed really well too, bumping up this FPS Battle Royale title right up to 4K high, and the build pulled in 165 frames per second on average. A really impressive set of results here from the 7900 XT and wider build as a whole. It's really amazing to see what you can achieve for that $1,600 price tag. Just a little more than that $1,500 budget I see so many of you guys building systems for. What do you guys think of the performance of this build and this system in general? Let me know down in the comments below. Get subscribed to see more from us. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.